Greetings, Ron Niebrugge here. So I've had a lot of people in the last few months ask me why I made the change from Canon to Olympus. And just to give you a little bit of backstory, I've been a long-time Canon photographer, 20-something plus years. My entire professional career I've shot Canon lenses. I'm normally not a big gear guy. I kind of find a system that works for me and stick with it. But I started having a number of people visit me at the Desert Photo Retreat this winter. Jim Griggs, Joe McDonald, people that were bringing the Olympus system and talking about just how excited they were. I mean, Joe McDonald's been around forever and he was acting like a brand new photographer. So it piqued my interest, and Olympus was nice enough to loan me gear for over the summertime. And I've since gone through that, tried it out, and now have sold most of my Canon stuff, and I'm fully invested in Olympus. So a lot of people are asking me why, what are the advantages? And there are many of them, but I want to touch on some of them right now. The big one is the smaller size that you get with the 4/3 system. You know, this is the equivalent of a 80 to 300 2.8. It's certainly much smaller than the equivalent with the full frame camera, and certainly much smaller than, say, my 500 f4 Canon when I compare it to, say, a 300 2.8, which is the full frame equivalent of a 600. So having the smaller form size is a big plus. I knew that going in. That was not a surprise. And for me, doing trips to Africa next year, I'm guiding another trip to Antarctica where I'm driving Zodiac, and I need to be able to pay attention and drive Zodiac and yet still have my camera there. The smaller form size is a big plus. But there's a bunch of other things that, for me, ended up tipping the weight into the Olympus favor. Some of them are minor and simple, like having a flip for the flip LCD, something that Canon's never implemented in their serious cameras, and it drove me crazy to be able to shoot from a low angle or a high angle and not be trying to look through the viewfinder is incredible. Having the live viewfinder that gives you what you see is what you get when you look through the viewfinder is a big plus. In fact, you can overlay grids, you can overlay a lot of different things, including a live histogram over either the viewfinder or the LCD screen on the back, which is a big plus. There's some features that are almost, I call it cheating. This Pro Capture, where you're able to hold the shutter down halfway and it's constantly buffering images, up to 35 images. Then when you hit the shutter, it then goes back in time and writes all those 35 images to your card. I call it, a friend of mine calls it the time machine, which is a perfect description. So basically, I can't wait to use it at the Desert Photo Retreat this winter. To get a bird flying in and landing on a perch, hit the shutter, and then be able to go back at 18 or 60 frames a second, up to 35 images, and pick the best one where the wings are extended. I mean, it is like cheating. I think that feature alone is a game changer. Breaching wells, any kind of action where it's hard to capture the action at once, I think is going to be a huge plus. They call it Pro Capture. The camera shoots 60 frames a second, which is insanely fast with the electronic shutter. It also has another feature called Live Composite, where you basically take a base exposure and then it overlays any brighter pixels in subsequent exposures. And so you can do multiple exposures. This allows you to capture fireworks in the sky, multiple fireworks, and it won't blow out the first one, but it'll keep adding subsequent fireworks to your scene. Star trails is another thing. You could actually do in-camera star trails as it keeps adding to the picture, and you can even see it as it's creating this image. I think there's a lot of different uses, possibly Aurora. I haven't tried it with Aurora, but this live composite mode is going to be a big plus. Silent mode. My Canon 5D4 had a silent mode, but it still was a click. I mean, it was just a quieter click, but it wasn't silent. This camera is truly silent. In fact, when I'm using silent mode, I find myself looking at the LCD screen. Did I really even take a picture? I can't wait to use this with camera trapping at the Desert Photo Retreat this winter, because a lot of the disturbance with the wildlife when the camera's real close isn't the flash going off, it's the sound, and that gets their attention. So to have a perfectly silent mode, even during the daytime using remotes with the birds, when the camera's just a foot or two away from the bird, it makes for a really neat composition, but it often makes the birds jump. especially the first few days as they get used to it. To have a pure silent mode, I'm super excited about those possibilities. What other image stabilization in camera, camera body stabilization is incredible. To give you an example, I was guiding a trip this summer, about last month, in the Brooks Range, and it was night. We were hoping for aurora, and if you haven't seen aurora, when it first starts to appear, before it's totally dark out, a lot of times it's hard to tell if that's even aurora in the sky. Is it just a high wispy cloud that the moonlight's lighting up a little bit? And so what I've always done is just grabbed an exposure, handheld, just pointed at the sky and clicked, and then checked the LCD screen, and if it's a little bit of aurora, you'll start to see color. And I did this with the Olympus. I just stepped outside. I had the 18 1.8, which is equivalent of a 16, held it up at the sky, clicked, and oh, sure enough, there's some color in the sky. It's starting to, in fact, that night ended up being an epic night, but it was just starting to show. And then I zoomed in a little bit and looked, and the stars were pinpoints. And this was a 2.5 second exposure, and I didn't even really try to stabilize it. I just took a 2.5 second exposure, and I captured pinpoint stars. So the in-body camera and stabilization is incredible. If your lens has stabilization as well, it just makes it even more stabilized, if that makes sense. So I think you get up to 7 stops of stabilization. It was just incredible. I'll give you examples on the screen here. Live neutral density filter. You don't have to you want those milky, smooth waterfalls, that kind of thing, but it's a bright summer day. Even at 100 ISO, you still have a pretty fast shutter speed. Here you can dial in neutral density, 3, 4, 5 stops. What it effectively does is take multiple pictures and combine them into one lower shutter speed type image. It's called live neutral density filter. Haven't had a chance to play with that. Another cool feature, I think. High res mode. What the camera does is actually takes a number of pictures, 6, 8, something like that, where the sensor is shifted a half a pixel, and it'll do it rapid succession, less than a second. So if you're on a tripod, it'll do all these pictures and then combine them into one high-res picture. And if you're on a tripod, it's an 80 megapixel image that you end up with. Even handheld, it'll combine into a 50 megapixel image. It won't work with moving subjects, which would make sense, but for stationary subjects, to be able to get that high-res extra detail from this smaller sensor camera is going to be fantastic. Focus bracketing, focus stacking, another thing that some of the other bodies, I think Nikon's had that, but my Canons have never had that. Focus stacking, and with the right lens, you can tell it to take 6 images and it'll focus click, focus click, focus click, focus click. Fantastic for landscapes, for macro photography as well. So focus stacking would give you then 6, 8, however many pictures you want, and you can combine them later. Take that back. Focus bracketing will take a number of pictures and then you can combine them later, but it'll also do in-camera focus stacking, where it'll stack the images in camera, so it'll focus click, 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 combine them into one image with incredible depth of field. Something that I've always wished we had. The autofocus is incredible. I'll give you some examples, but with my Canon, birds in the flight like puffins, some of the hardest things to get in flight. They're small, they're like a football going through the air. This summer I was able to photograph puffins and get sharp images while in a boat. With the 300, which is equivalent of a 600, it was incredible. I'll give you an example, but you could zoom into 100% and they're crispy sharp. So the ability to capture things in flight was impressive. It also has focus limiting, in-camera focus limiting. Like on my Canon 500 f4, there's a switch, and I could say, well, don't go to the minimum focus, go to 12 feet and 12 meters, something like that. I forget what the numbers were, but you could limit it with just one switch. With this camera, you can go into the menu and program the far and near settings, so you could tell the camera, only focus within 8 feet and 12 feet. So you're only hunting in that range. Like at a desert photo retreat where I have perches at a set distance, it's going to be really nice to have the camera just focusing very quickly in that short amount of distance. And you can make those numbers anything. You're not limited to a switch on the lens. It also has manual focus assist, which if you switch to manual mode and you try to fine tune, it immediately pops up the viewfinder image times 10. So it's perfect for getting that super fine tuning. Also has focus peaking, which is if you're fine tuning with the manual focus lens, anything that's in focus will be outlined in red. Something that just makes it focusing so much easier. Nighttime for stars, to be able to see all the stars outlined in red. It's like, okay, you know you got the focus dialed in just right. So situations where you need the perfect focus, this focus peaking is really a big plus. What else? All these lenses have crazy minimum focus distance. So this lens, which is equivalent of a full frame of 80 to 300, the minimum focus distance is like 0.7 meters. My 300 f4, which is the equivalent of a 600, it's 1.4 meters. My 500 f4 Canon, I was excited. Its minimum focus distance was 3.7 meters. It was more than twice as much, and I thought that was like stupid close. So these things focus really close, which is nice. It almost gives you macro capability with your telephoto lenses. It's got a better interval timer. You did have an interval timer in the 5D Mark IV, finally. Magic Lantern was able to add that capability for years earlier, but it still was a limited one. This one you can actually say, don't start the interval timer for 3 hours. I know when I do star trails, say in Arizona, I like to start after midnight, 1, 2 in the morning when most of the planes are out of the skies, and you don't want to stay up till 2 in the morning to start the thing. So you can program, say, 5 hours from now, start taking this many pictures. You can also combine them into a time lapse. It's got HDR in camera with RAW files. Even the Pro Capture, which is the time machine where it goes back in time, 35 images back in time, they're all RAW files. So you're not having to sacrifice the quality with the JPEG. So there's just all these little things. The small form size factor was something that came, that was evident about the 4/3 systems from the get-go. So that wasn't a surprise, but it's all these other features that a lot of these I hadn't even heard of that really made the difference for me. What are the cons? One of the cons, and this is actually a pro and a con, one of the cons I hear about a lot is the 4/3 system has extra depth of field at any given aperture. And so if you want a bird on a perch and you want that milky, smooth, out of focus background, it's much more difficult to get because you have the extra depth of field. Now at the Desert Photo Retreat, I have some of my backgrounds are like a mile away, so I don't think it'll be an issue there, but it could be an issue. Why I say it's also a pro is because I was in the Brooks Range photographing autumn colors this fall. It's kind of windy, things were blowing around, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have a slow shutter speed. I'm like, wait a minute, I only need to be at f8. I have the depth of field of f16, maybe slightly more. So this is so there's some pluses as well. Macro photography, where you're fighting for depth of field, to have extra depth of field at any given aperture is a plus. Where I think it's going to be cool is for my night camera trapping when I'm trying to do stars in the sky. So usually I want a pretty wide open aperture, 2.4, something like that. But the animal is often fairly close. I do that on purpose. I want a nice close animal. It's very dramatic. And the stars end up being, if the fox or whatever is only a few feet away, I end up with a little bit of blurry stars in the background because I'm at such a big aperture. But if f2.8 has the depth of field of 5.6, maybe now I'll get sharper star points and still have a fast shutter speed, a big aperture where I can capture a lot of stars. So I didn't mean to say shutter speed there, but the bigger aperture will let me capture more stars, more light. So I think that extra depth of field is a pro and a con. But otherwise, a lot of people ask me, I get this email a lot, is this camera as good as the 5D Mark IV, for example? And the one thing I would say to that is, and a lot of people, the Canon 1DS, the original one, which was 11 megapixel camera, for me, I had billboards, I had many magazine covers, I had double page spreads in magazines. That camera was good enough. And so anything beyond that, now you're just starting to get better noise, better dynamic range. What's more important, is it adequate, is it good enough, versus it doesn't always have to be the best sensor. A lot of these other features I just talked about are just as important, if not more important. It's certainly better than the 5D, 5D2. I think it's better quality than the 5D3. 5D4, I don't know. The 5D4 might be a little bit better with noise, is my suspicion. I never did check them side by side with identical. I'm not one of those pixel peepers that you talk about. Pixel peeper, try to say that 3 times fast. But so I never really dove into that, because for me, this was more than adequate when it came to quality. For crying out loud, the iPhone is probably better quality than what I need for most situations. So that's a big question, and I didn't really dive into it. Certainly the quality when it came to autofocus and flight, and the quality of the way it handled noise with the Aurora pictures. So I didn't get a chance, because it's sunny all summer, I wasn't able to chance to really test the noise capabilities until this fall. But my Aurora pictures, I was at 3200, 4000 ISO, and the noise was certainly perfectly adequate. And with the new tools coming out, noise is less and less of an issue. So that's a question I get a lot, and that's basically, it's perfectly incredible. You know, the quality I think is excellent and more than what most people would ever need. And the lenses are also, I found, all to be really sharp. And one thing I love about the Olympus is it has these built-in lens hoods. So you're not chasing lens hoods all around. Even the 300 has a nice built-in lens hood, metal. Everything's really well built with these things, nice quality steel. So anyway, long story short, anyway, if you have questions, if I said something wrong, which is more than possible, feel free to leave comments down below. I'll respond to them. If you want to see more images and see more things that I'm up to, you can follow me at Instagram. It's at Niebrugge, and I'll put the words there on the frame, because that's not easy to spell. Anyway, I'm Ron Niebrugge, and until next time, we'll see you later.